So tonight, I'm privileged to have Will Oechsler, and I've known Will's for a decade now. And I met Will in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I was attending a startup weekend, and some of you may be familiar with those that they have throughout the country. I think they're still going. And you focus on, for one weekend, all kinds of things that you can do from startup, including pitches when you're done. And with that one, I think there was some funding that was potentially available. We probably had about 25 people that were trying to start a business in one weekend. Will did a good job, and I went up and talked to him, and we connected right away we both have children that are adopted, and he was telling a little bit about his adoption story. So it was something that we talked about. And then Will moved to Denver, and he became the chief marketing officer for Furniture Row. And if you're familiar with Furniture Row and their footprint throughout the country, Will was chief marketing officer for them. And as soon as I made the jump to Colorado, the next day I was in Will's office because he was the only person in Colorado that I knew. And so we established a friendship since then. And he's a good friend of mine, and but very professional in his field. And he and his bride have since moved back to Grand Rapids, and I'll let him tell you what he's doing, but he's had a lot of executive positions, including president of a marketing company for 10 years as well. And a while back, he came into Canyon. He loves Canyon. And I introduced him to Brad. So Brad is aware of him as well. We had lunch together one time. So Will, I appreciate you taking time. You got kind of short notice as far as doing this, but I think it's going to work out. And you are on, and the group here, as well as the folks online, are entrepreneurs in Southern Colorado that are starting their own businesses. And of course, you know about this session as far as the BootStrap U that we're trying to put together here. So thanks for joining us, Will. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, and good evening. I've been sitting in this chair since about 7 o'clock Eastern time this morning. We have a global executive team meeting every other Tuesday. So I work for a ministry. I'm a senior vice president of U.S. operations here out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. But as Phil said, I spent time in advertising, spent time in marketing, spent time in film, spent time in publishing. I'm sure everybody's on LinkedIn, and you don't need to hear my resume. But anyway, thank you for having me. I also teach at West Virginia University. So right before this session, I was actually on a presentation on ethnographic research that my class and another professor who teaches the same audience insight class decided to bring a guest speaker in. So I literally hung up on that Zoom and then hopped onto the Zoom. So I kind of appreciated having a little bit of downtime. And Phil mentioned that it was kind of short notice. And I said, hey, that's okay. I think when I did the startup weekend, it was also short notice. I think they got a hold of me maybe a day before and said, we have a lunchtime opening. Would you come in and speak? And so I said, sure. So special thanks to my friends, Phil, and to Brad. You know who you are. And thank you for thinking of me on this topic, failure. Wow. And then we'll get to the fun stuff. We'll talk about success after Will's off the line. But anyway, I was wondering, and did you hand these out, Phil?
I did.
Okay.
The folks online, of course, on Zoom didn't get them, but everyone in here did.
Okay. So I wondered if your choice to have me talk about failure was influenced by this article that was done by the Grand Rapids Business Journal in 2009. And the headline is Learning Life Lessons from Missteps and Failures. What? I said, I have to admit it that when I saw that headline after doing the interview, it was a surprise to me. I said, really, that's my story? That's what you got out of our 2 hours and 15 minutes together? That's the angle you want to go? That's kind of the human story that you want to get out here, the human interest story? Well, that was almost a dozen years ago. And I did, by the way, I did frame it, because when you get in the business journal, they always try to sell you the article on a nice frame. But I did frame it because it was an interesting angle for the story. And I thought, well, it really did tell my story, and it was a good angle. And a lot of people called me up and said, a lot of times I read these profiles and I don't know, I don't relate to them. There are all these wonderful success stories and how people just built it and built it and built it and got better and better and, you know, bigger and bigger and richer and richer. And you come in and you share stories that are kind of about some of the struggles. Well, in the dozen years since the article was written, I can assure you there's been plenty more failures where those came from, but also some triumphs and some tragedies along the way, and a lot of testing. You know, in business, and you all know this, in business, you get tested every day, and it's tough. But anyway, I guess, you know, I think about it, if you live long enough, right, and you work hard enough, and you love deeply enough, you're going to get hurt, and you're going to get tired, and you're going to fail. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay. You know, we all have different tolerance to pain. But there's a saying out there, and it was interesting that Phil talked about adoption, because when you adopt, especially special need kids, there's a saying you hear all the time. It says, hurt people hurt people. But I ascribe to something different. I really believe that hurt people can help people. And so maybe what I shared tonight will help some of you in some way. I like to say that I like to be a small part of something big. So whatever your dreams are, whatever your businesses are, your aspirations, you know, maybe the 10 minutes or so that I have tonight will in some way speak to you and help you. And that's what I hope. So tonight I have a few stories that I'd like to share. Most of my career has been in storytelling of one aspect or another, whether it's writing or film or publishing. But we all have a story. We tell our story. We live the story every day. So I thought maybe I'd just share a few stories. And because I look at my life in 3 different stages, I thought I would follow that format tonight. And let me explain the stages a little bit. The first third of my life, and think about it this way, you know, from say birth to age 30, the first third of my life was really devoted to learning and to growing and to developing. I describe it as it was my time of becoming, right? And the second third of my life was a time for building. I built a career. In fact, I built several careers. And in fact, I'm still building careers. And I built a home and I built a family. And, you know, it was a time of kind of acquisition. But now I'm kind of running headlong into what is certainly the last third of my life. It's not a morbid way to think about it, but I feel like I'm in that last third of my life. I turned the corner into my 60s, and I'm really planning on this to be my best third. So I look at my first third and my next third, but my last third is really my best third, because I'm committing this last third to passing on whatever wisdom, work that I have in me, any wealth that I may, you know, have to disperse. But this is now the time of giving. So the first third is becoming, the second third is building, and the last third, the best third, is really about giving back and sharing. So first, a story of failure, because that's what the topic is. So I didn't mean to be so encouraging and inspiring at the beginning, because I know this is about failure. So the first story of failure I took from my first third. And if you read the article, I know that Phil wanted to share it with you. You get a little hint of it in this article. I had to reread the article. I hadn't read it in a while. It hangs on a wall in my office. But I haven't really read it in a while. I just read the headline, because the headline's a good reminder that, you know, it's not about me. And success has many different faces. So, you know, I graduated from a community college in Maryland. It took me 3 years, and I had a 2.89 GPA in general studies. You know, so obviously I was maybe a full-time student, sort of, but I really was playing more than I was studying. And I was working full-time at the same time, but I really I wasn't engaged. So when I think about a 2.89 GPA in general studies from a community college, I felt kind of like a failure. You know, that felt like I didn't really do all that I could. I knew I could have done better, but I didn't really feel like doing more. So what did I do with that? Well, I worked full time, and I enjoyed working, and I enjoyed playing and traveling and all those things. But 8 years later, I returned to college, and I decided, okay, maybe I can get into a university. And I had to start back at a community college in Austin, Texas, to bring my GPA up enough where, as a non-traditional student, they would let me in to the University of Texas, hook 'em horns. So, you know, I was able to graduate with a bachelor's degree, and I remember it was awesome, but I didn't feel like I was done. And I had a few people that just said, you know, you should really think about doing a master's degree. And so I went on, and 2 years later, I achieved that master's degree with a 3.89 GPA. And I thought about that student who really didn't think he was all that smart, who really didn't work all that hard, and just all of a sudden realizing I had achieved something that nobody else really in my family had. Most of the people I graduated high school with hadn't done. But it took focus and it took discipline. But more than that, it really took the encouragement of others. I had to have some people say to me, you can do this, because I really didn't believe it in myself that I could do it. And then finally, I did the hard thing is I had to start believing in myself. I had to stop the tape recorder in my head that said, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you don't work hard enough, you're not going to achieve this. And I said to myself, Will, you can do this, and you will do this. And I did it. And all the long nights and all the hard work, I remember graduating, we had a brand new baby, you know, and standing up there in my cap and gown with, you know, a little baby boy, thinking, wow, nobody will ever take this away from me. You know, at least I did this. And now it's like, now what do I do? I have to go find a job, professional career, and so forth. I started a PhD program. I had about 9 hours into it. And then I happened to just talk to a friend who was doing recruiting for a big agency in Chicago called Leo Burnett. And at the time, Leo Burnett was the largest ad agency in America. And I thought, boy, I've been living below the poverty line in a house without heat for a long time. And I don't know if I can really tough out another 5 years to get my PhD. So in retrospect, I still feel somewhat like I failed, because I didn't really complete what I wanted, but I'd started a whole career in marketing and advertising, and I got to work on some of the biggest brands, Disney, Marlboro, Reebok, Sony, P&G, McDonald's. It was just an incredible time. And there's a wonderful adage from Black Belt magazine that says, you don't rise to the level of your expectations, you fall to the level of your training. So what I found at Leo Burnett is that I didn't rise to that potential. What I learned at Leo Burnett was what, you know, I could fall to that level of training. Wherever I went from that point on, that training that I had at the #1 brand agency in America, I could take with me and I could leverage that. So I learned that, but I had to say to myself, yeah, you're good enough to work there. You can go after that job. You can leave behind the dream of a PhD and actually put food on the table, stop eating, you know, a couple, you know, a baked potato at lunch for $2 and, you know, some biscuits and gravy for under $1 and a cup of coffee at the student union, because that's all you could afford. So that was good. So that's kind of in the build, you know, in the building part, in the growing part, those early years, that first third, that's a failure story and how that turned around. It took almost 10 years. And all along the way, I had all this kind of self-talk that was just keeping me from moving it forward until one day I said, yeah, I'm going to do it. So now let's talk about the, you know, failure during the next third, right? During the building years, the acquiring, right? You build a career, you build a family, you build a house, right? You build a bank account, you're doing. And you've kind of done the growing and developing. You may be doing some continuing education, but now it's about amassing stuff and getting stuff. And so I thought maybe I would share a few excerpts from a book that I started writing in 2009 after being fired from a career, from a position, an executive position. But I started writing this book, and it was called Ready, Aim, You're Fired, Leading, Leaving, and Landing on Your Feet. All right. And it was a little bit of a catharsis for me, and you'll understand why when I read this. So just bear with me and close your eyes if you like. I always tell my kids to close their eyes when I read the story. And when they read stories to me, I always close my eyes. The average chief marketing officer lasts just 26 months in the job. A downturn in business, aggressive competitors, and transitions in leadership can suddenly render even the most successful marketing professional jobless. As much as I thought I knew about marketing, this stat from global executive search firm Spencer Stuart had escaped me. But there it was, staring back from a Business Week article by David Kiley and Bert Helm entitled The Short, Happy Life of the Chief Marketing Officer. I asked my executive assistant to make copies for each member of my marketing leadership team. A little later, she would pop back into my office to ask, "What do you want me to do with that Why You Are the Way You Are document?" Seems she had read enough of the article while making copies to gain a little bit more perspective about her boss, i.e. why I pushed so hard, worked at a frenetic pace, and cared so passionately about so many things. She had never supported a marketing executive before, and I remember making a point of letting her know what she was signing up for when interviewing for her position. My 3-minute elevator speech went something like this: marketing is a fast-paced and deadline-driven business. It's equally parts science and art. Your work is highly subjective. Everyone has an opinion on everything you do, and they don't mind sharing it, not always with you. Marketing serves many masters, both inside and outside the company. It must produce results in the short term, but has long-term benefits that you may never realize. There is a complex network of pieces, parts, and people that must be effectively orchestrated. Very high, sometimes unrealistic expectations must be either met or managed, and there will never be enough time, money, people, energy, and creativity to accomplish all that is possible. I shared the article with my marketing leadership team at a Monday morning meeting. In it, Kiley and Helms describes the chief marketing officer as the dead man or woman walking through the C-suite of many companies. Of all the ideas and insights we had discussed as a team, this one point really seemed to strike a chord. Someone cautioned against getting paranoid over the bleak pictures that the authors painted. This made me laugh and reminded me when Danny, the high-strung Mercedes-driving dentist played by Jack Weston in Alan Alda's The Four Seasons, asked, "Why does everyone think I'm paranoid? Do you discuss this behind my back?" Admittingly, even before reading the article with Stuart's findings, I had started to wonder if my time was running out. Was that a target I felt on my back? Was my expiration date approaching? Ours was an industry in transition. The economic slowdown was hurting everyone's business, and leadership changes were coming. Many of the signs were there if I had just slowed down enough to notice them. And new leadership did eventually come. A new strategic direction was set, and a new executive team formed. That was my reality. After 30 months, I was out of the executive vice president of marketing position, beating the average CMO tenure by 4 months. Like the children of Garrison Keillor's Lake Wobegon, just slightly above average. Not long after my exit, a few of my close friends asked me whether it was all worth it, meaning had I known the outcome, would I have still taken the job? Why take a position with only a two-year lifespan, or stay in a career with such volatility? And now what were my plans? It was addressing these questions both for those asking them, but for me personally, which prompted me to write this book. Many of the thoughts and feelings I have been dealing with, as well as the experience I have shared with others and others have shared with me, shaped its content. And then finally, I've spent most of my personal, academic, and professional life stepping out, taking chances, being unconventional, and trying in some small way to make a difference. Along the way, there were those who have been instructive, encouraging, and inspiration. My hope is that in sharing my own story, along with the stories of others who have traveled similar paths, you'll find strength for your journey. So you want a copy of the book? Anybody want a copy of the book? You can't have it. Sorry, I never published it. I didn't finish it. I told you it was a catharsis. I went away to a cabin and I just wrote. I poured everything out into 20, 30,000 words. I submitted the manuscript, tried to get it published, and I kind of gave up on it. It's one of those things I would chalk up as it was a success because I wrote something and I got the ideas out, but at the same time, I never took it all the way to the end. But the idea here is that sometimes you put yourself in a position that you know you might fail. In fact, failure could be very much the outcome that's going to happen. But you step in anyway, and you try anyway, and you work really, really hard. I don't know if you know the movie about Shackleton, who went to the South Pole. You know, they put a little notice. I have this on my wall here. They put a little notice in the paper: men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. So they were going to go down to Antarctica, and they got trapped in the ice, and Shackleton did not lose a single man. And it was a year-long trek trying to get back to any kind of humanity, but he never lost a single man. But the line to go on that adventure wrapped around corners in London when it was posted. And that's sometimes what it is like in business. And I'm not an entrepreneur. I always work for entrepreneurs for some reason, but I don't have that club in my bag. But I know that for entrepreneurs especially, boy, that risk of failure is difficult, almost makes you don't want to try. But try you do, and try again you do, and you try to make it right. So I know I'm short on time, but I wanted to talk about that last third, what I call my best third. And you know, it didn't start off really well. So I like to kind of think that my last third started fine, but my second third ended horribly. So it started out with the ending of my marriage of 34 years. And that was kind of the worst failure ever. I mean, beyond anything that I could even imagine. And so I came out of that period and it was very bleak. And all of a sudden I'm in a cabin on 65 acres that I was renting, this little tiny cabin. And it sounds idyllic, but you're all alone and you're trying to regroup from it all and figure out what now, what next. And of course, right in the middle of that divorce, I was let go by Furniture Row after 5 years as their chief marketing officer. So it's like, okay. Oh, and then my car had died. I was just like this really bad country song because, you know, I lost my house, I lost my family, I lost my car, I lost my job. You know, pretty much I had lost everything. But I did have a dream. And I had that dream on my wall at the office because somebody said, hey, put your dream up on the wall. And so I had put a map of northern Spain, and I had written in the corner spring 2018. And I said, I'm going to walk across northern Spain on the Camino de Santiago. I had seen a movie called The Way, and I had learned about this trail, this 1,000-year-old pilgrimage that people took. And I thought, wow, what a time to do it. I had made a goal that I would do it before I turned 60. So 1 month before I turned 60, because I'm a procrastinator, but I do get things done. 1 month, I was flying to Madrid, driving up to Oviedo, and I started walking the Camino de Santiago. And it was a solitary time for me. I had 95% of the time I was alone. It was the most challenging route. It's called the Primitivo, the original route. You know, but a couple weeks later, about 340 kilometers, 350 kilometers, I got lost a few times. I walked into, you know, Santiago de Compostela, and I had my passport. I should really have my props ready, but I had my passport stamped at each of my nights stay. And then I got my Compostela, which is in Latin, and it just says you've completed this pilgrimage. And so even in the worst times, even in the darkest times, when I had really felt like a failure, there was a dream that kept me going, and it had nothing to do with work. It had nothing to do with money. But I was like, I'm going to go live this thing. I'm going to make this happen. And then I turned 60. And then as things sometimes go, soon after that trip, I met someone. And I didn't think that would ever happen, but I met someone. And not too long after that, we were married. And between us, we have 10 kids. She has 5, I have 5. And, we're starting it all over again. And that's, I think, one of the things you learn, that even in the darkest times, even in failure, there is a redemptive aspect to your life, and it's a redemptive aspect to your story. So my only encouragement there would be, don't give up. If it's business, if it's personal, if it's relational, if it's financial, just don't give up. Keep pressing on. If you read Undaunted Courage about the Lewis and Clark expedition, they kept separate journals, and each of them wrote in their journals, but they didn't compare the journals till the end. And the one message that both of them wrote, and this is by Stephen Ambrose, wrote the book, the one message that they had in the book was press on. Just press on.